The Petersons had always appeared to be the perfect family. Nestled in a small Midwestern town, their two-story colonial home stood as a testament to hard work and stability. The neatly trimmed hedges, the meticulously mowed lawn, and the white picket fence all painted a picture of idyllic suburban life. John and Rebecca Peterson were the kind of couple who inspired admiration, or envy, depending on who you asked. John, a diligent and thoughtful engineer, was as steady as the foundation of the bridges he designed. His calm demeanor and unshakable focus earned him respect at work, while his soft-spoken nature made him a beloved figure in the neighborhood. He was the guy who helped his elderly neighbors clear their driveways after a snowstorm and volunteered to coach Little League even though he and Rebecca didn't have children. Rebecca, on the other hand, was the sparkling centerpiece of their social life. She had a magnetic presence, a laugh that drew people in and a natural charm that made her the life of every gathering. As a part-time event planner, she orchestrated community events with flair, seamlessly blending her professional expertise with her personal charisma. Together, they seemed unshakable, the kind of couple others looked to as a model of love and partnership. But beneath the surface, there were cracks in their perfect facade. John had always been a man of habit. His morning started with the same routine: coffee brewing in the kitchen, the soft strains of classical music on the radio, and a few minutes spent reading the news. Rebecca, more spontaneous by nature, often teased him about his predictability. She thrived on the unexpected, a stark contrast to John's measured approach to life. It was one of the things he had always loved about her, her ability to bring a sense of adventure to his ordered world. Yet lately, he had begun to feel like an outsider in his own home. Their conversations had grown shorter, peppered with small talk instead of the heartfelt exchanges that once defined their evenings. Rebecca seemed distant, her laughter carrying a hollow edge that John couldn't quite place. She was spending more time out of the house, explaining her absences with vague references to late-night work events and social commitments. John wanted to believe her. He wanted to trust that the life they had built together wasn't slipping through his fingers. But there were signs he couldn't ignore. It started with the phone calls. Rebecca's phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter or bedside table, was now always within arm's reach. She answered texts with a newfound urgency, her smile curling in a way that sent a shiver down John's spine. On more than one occasion, he caught her turning her phone screen away as he walked into the room. "Work drama," she had said one evening, tucking her phone into her bag with a practiced air of nonchalance. "You know how demanding my clients can be." John nodded, forcing a smile. He wanted to believe her, he truly did. But late one night, while Rebecca was asleep, he found himself staring at her phone, debating whether to pick it up. The desire to uncover the truth warred with his sense of morality. Was it right to invade her privacy? Was he imagining things, or was there something more sinister at play? He left the phone untouched, but the unease gnawed at him. The catalyst came on a Tuesday evening when John came home early, hoping to surprise Rebecca with dinner. As he opened the door, he heard her voice, a low, intimate tone that was unlike the vibrant cheerfulness she usually displayed. I know. You're irresistible. But we have to be careful," she said, her words punctuated by a soft laugh. John froze in the doorway, his hand tightening around the bag of groceries he had brought home. He didn't make a sound, his breath shallow as he strained to hear the other side of the conversation. Rebecca's tone grew softer, almost conspiratorial. "Don't worry about him. He's clueless. I could tell him I spent the night dancing on tables, and he wouldn't bat an eye." The sound of her laugh hit John like a punch to the stomach. His world, carefully constructed and painstakingly maintained, teetered on the brink of collapse. That night, John didn't confront Rebecca. Instead, he lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with questions. Who was she talking to? How long had this been going on? Was it a fleeting infidelity or something deeper, something that threatened to unravel everything they had built? Rebecca, blissfully unaware of John's turmoil, slept soundly. In the days that followed, John observed Rebecca more closely. He noted the way her laughter seemed brighter when she was texting someone, how she hummed to herself as she got ready to leave the house. It was the way she used to hum when they were newlyweds, full of excitement and anticipation. He began to piece together a timeline, small details falling into place like a puzzle. The late nights, the sudden interest in fitness classes, the way she had started dressing differently, sharper, bolder. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was confirmation. The breaking point came one evening when Rebecca, emboldened by her own secrecy, made a startling confession over dinner. "You know," she said, her tone casual, "I've been spending wild nights with my lover for months now. It's so nice, I can't even tell you." She laughed, the sound brittle and sharp, as if testing his reaction. John set his fork down, his expression unreadable. "I know," he replied evenly. "Go ahead." Rebecca froze, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. "Why aren't you angry?" John met her gaze, a storm brewing behind his calm exterior. "Because your lover will never be found again." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Rebecca's smile faltered, her laughter dying in her throat. She searched his face for a sign of humor, a glimmer of light-heartedness that would absolve the gravity of his words. But there was none. The room was so silent that Rebecca could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, each second hammering away at her composure. She stared at John, her smile now a distant memory, replaced by a knot of unease curling in her stomach. He wasn't joking. There wasn't even a flicker of sarcasm in his tone, no glimmer of the warm, forgiving man she had married. She tried to laugh, but the sound came out strained, a hollow imitation of her usual carefree demeanor. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, attempting to mask the tremor in her voice. John didn't reply immediately. Instead, he lifted his glass of water, taking a slow sip, his gaze never leaving hers. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, unervingly steady. "It means exactly what you think it means." Her hands instinctively gripped the edge of the table as if bracing herself against an unseen force. "You're scaring me, John." "Good," he said simply. Rebecca pushed her chair back, the wooden legs scraping against the floor as she stood. "If this is some kind of twisted joke, it's not funny," she snapped, trying to regain control of the conversation. John rose as well, his movements deliberate and composed. "You think I don't know, Rebecca?" he asked, his voice soft but heavy with meaning. "Do you think I haven't noticed the late nights, the secrecy, the way you light up whenever you look at your phone?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. He wasn't guessing. He knew. For the first time in years, Rebecca felt genuinely powerless. She had always prided herself on her ability to take charge of any situation, to charm her way through confrontations and smooth over rough edges with ease. But John's calm, almost clinical demeanor was impenetrable, leaving her floundering for a response. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice faltering. "You're being ridiculous." John laughed, a cold, mirthless sound that sent a chill down her spine. "I'm ridiculous," he repeated, shaking his head. "Do you know how many hours I've spent trying to convince myself that I was imagining things? That my wife, the woman I've built my entire life around, couldn't possibly be lying to me?" Rebecca felt her defenses crumbling. She turned away, crossing the room to the sink, trying to put some distance between them. "You're overreacting," she muttered, staring down at the pile of dishes she had left from breakfast. "Am I?" The weight of his words hung in the air, pressing down on her like a physical force. John had known for weeks, months, even, that something was wrong. But knowing and confronting the truth were two entirely different things. When he first discovered the affair, he had gone through the motions of disbelief, searching for excuses to justify Rebecca's behavior. She was stressed. Overworked. Lonely, perhaps, from the long hours he spent at his job. But the more he uncovered, the less plausible those excuses became. The late-night phone calls, the unexplained absences, the subtle changes in her demeanor, they all pointed to a single, undeniable conclusion. And then he had found the messages. It had been almost too easy. One night, while Rebecca was in the shower, she had left her phone unlocked on the coffee table. John's hands had trembled as he scrolled through the texts, his heart pounding with every word he read. "Ethan, last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you." "Rebecca, me too. I wish I could see you every night." Ethan. The name had seared itself into John's mind, a brand of betrayal he couldn't erase. He had always suspected there was someone else, but seeing the evidence in black and white had been a different kind of pain, a raw, unrelenting ache that refused to fade. Rebecca turned back to face him, her expression defiant. "So what if I've been seeing someone?" she blurted, her voice rising with each word. "You've been distant for years, John. Always at work, always preoccupied with your projects. I've felt like nothing more than a piece of furniture in this house." John's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "I needed someone to make me feel alive again," she continued, tears brimming in her eyes. "I needed someone to remind me that I'm more than just a wife stuck in a routine. And you weren't there, John. You haven't been there for a long time." Her words cut deep, but they didn't break him. John had heard enough. He took a step closer, his presence towering over her, his expression unreadable. "And that's your justification?" he asked quietly. "You betrayed me, betrayed us, because you felt neglected?" Rebecca wiped at her eyes, her anger giving way to guilt. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. It just did." John exhaled slowly, his hands resting on the back of the chair he had been sitting in moments earlier. "And what about Ethan?" he asked, his voice devoid of emotion. "What does he mean to you?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I don't know," she admitted. "I care about him, but he's not your husband," John finished for her. She nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, charged with the weight of everything that had been said, and everything that hadn't. Finally, John broke the silence. "Where is he now?" Rebecca looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "Ethan," John said, his tone dangerously even. "Where is he?" "At his place. Waiting for you to call him." Her mouth opened and closed, her confusion and fear evident. I don't know. Why does it matter?" John straightened, his expression hardening. "Because I need you to understand something, Rebecca. Whatever you thought you had with him, whatever fantasies you've been living out, it's over. He's gone." Rebecca's breath hitched, her eyes widening. "What do you mean, gone?" John didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing alone in the kitchen, her mind racing with possibilities. As the door closed behind him, Rebecca felt the full weight of her choices crashing down on her. For the first time, she realized that this wasn't just about an affair. It was about something much darker, something she couldn't yet comprehend. And John, the man she thought she knew, had become a stranger in her own home. The door to John's study clicked shut behind him, the sound echoing through the house like the final note of a closing symphony. Rebecca remained frozen in the kitchen, her legs trembling beneath her. The man she had just spoken to, the man she had shared her life with for over a decade, was suddenly unrecognizable. John had always been gentle, calm, a solid, dependable presence even in the most turbulent of times. But now, there was an edge to him, a coldness she hadn't thought him capable of. And that word. Gone. It hung in the air, taunting her. Her heart pounded as her mind raced through possibilities. Surely, he didn't mean. No, he couldn't have. He wouldn't. But the John she had faced just minutes ago wasn't the John she thought she knew. She grabbed her phone with trembling hands, her instincts pulling her toward the one person she thought could provide clarity, Ethan. Her fingers hovered over his name, the urge to call him warring with a deep, gnawing fear of what she might discover. What if John hadn't been bluffing? Before she could make the call, her phone vibrated in her hand, the sudden movement nearly making her drop it. A message from Ethan lit up her screen. "I've been trying to reach you. Call me ASAP." Relief flooded through her, momentarily easing the weight in her chest. He was fine. Of course, he was fine. John's words had just been a cruel attempt to scare her, to put her in her place. But the question remained, how much did John know? And what was he capable of? Rebecca hit the call button, her nerves jangling as she brought the phone to her ear. Ethan answered on the first ring. "Rebecca, thank God. Where have you been?" "Ethan, her voice broke, the tension of the past hour catching up to her. "John knows. He knows about us." A pause. "What do you mean, he knows?" Ethan's tone shifted, the confidence she usually found so reassuring now tinged with unease. He confronted me during dinner, she said, pacing the kitchen. He said you're gone. I don't know what he meant by that, but the way he said it, Ethan. Gone. Ethan cut in, his voice rising. What the hell does that mean? Did he threaten you? No, Rebecca said quickly, though the memory of John's words sent a shiver down her spine. He didn't threaten me. But, Ethan, he's not himself. He's different. Cold. Another pause, longer this time. Rebecca, Ethan said carefully, you need to leave. Get out of the house now. What? I don't know what's going on, but if he's acting like that, you can't stay there. Pack a bag and come here. We'll figure it out together. Rebecca hesitated. Leaving felt drastic, unnecessary. John had always been the picture of restraint, even in the face of conflict. But there was something about Ethan's urgency, and John's chilling demeanor, that made her falter. I'll think about it, she said finally, her voice shaky. Don't think, Rebecca, Ethan snapped. Just do it. Please. She ended the call without answering, her mind spinning. She couldn't bring herself to leave. Not yet. She needed answers, and she wouldn't get them by running away. John sat in his study, the dim glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. The air was thick with the scent of old books and a faint tang of whiskey from the glass in his hand. He stared at the laptop screen in front of him, his face expressionless as he scrolled through a series of emails and text messages. Ethan's name popped up repeatedly, alongside snippets of conversations that turned John's stomach. Words of longing, promises whispered in secret. It was all there, laid bare in stark black and white. The evidence of betrayal that had shattered his world. But it wasn't just about the affair anymore. That initial wave of heartbreak had long since given way to something colder, more calculated. John wasn't the type to act impulsively. No, he believed in precision, in methodical planning. And over the past weeks, he had been planning meticulously. A notification pinged on his screen, drawing his attention to the live feed of a security camera. The grainy image showed a small, secluded parking lot, illuminated by a single flickering streetlight. Ethan's car was there, parked near the edge of the lot, its headlights cutting through the darkness. John's lips pressed into a thin line. Everything was in motion now. Rebecca crept down the hallway toward the study, her heart hammering in her chest. She had to talk to him, to break through the wall he had built around himself and find out what was going on. But as she approached the door, she hesitated. Through the narrow gap, she saw John hunched over his laptop, his face illuminated by the pale blue light of the screen. He looked different, harder, colder. There was no trace of the man she had shared her life with, no hint of the warmth she had once taken for granted. Before she could stop herself, she pushed the door open. John looked up, his expression unreadable. Rebecca. We need to talk, she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound firm. About? You know what about, she said, stepping into the room. What did you mean when you said Ethan was gone? What are you doing, John? He leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving hers. I think you already know the answer to that. Her breath caught in her throat. John, please. I need to know what's going on. I need to know you haven't, that you wouldn't. He stood, slowly, his towering frame suddenly imposing in the small room. What exactly are you accusing me of, Rebecca? She took a step back, her pulse racing. I'm not accusing you of anything. I need to hear you say it. Tell me you didn't do anything to Ethan. John took a step toward her, and for the first time, Rebecca felt genuine fear. You want to know what I've done, he said, his voice low and measured. You want the truth, Rebecca? Here it is. He paused, letting the silence stretch out between them, the tension so thick it felt like it might crush her. Ethan won't be a problem anymore, he said finally, his tone as calm as if he were discussing the weather. And if you're smart, you won't ask any more questions. Rebecca's blood ran cold. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Whatever was happening, whatever John had done, there was no going back now. She had to decide, run to Ethan and risk everything, or stay and try to salvage the broken pieces of her marriage. But as she stared into John's eyes, her choice didn't feel like a choice at all. Rebecca barely slept that night. Every creak of the house, every sigh of the wind rattling against the windows sent her heart into overdrive. John hadn't returned to their bedroom after their confrontation in the study. Instead, she had heard the faint sound of his study door closing, locking her out of the secrets he was clearly keeping. The dark circles under her eyes mirrored the storm brewing in her chest as she stood in front of the bathroom mirror the next morning. She felt hollow, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear, guilt, and disbelief. What did John mean when he said Ethan wouldn't be a problem anymore? What had he done? She replayed the conversation in her mind, searching for clues, for any indication that his words were nothing more than an empty threat. But no matter how she turned it over, she couldn't shake the sinking feeling that John had crossed a line, and dragged her along with him. Downstairs, the smell of coffee wafted through the air. The mundane normalcy of the scent only heightened her unease. When Rebecca finally gathered the courage to leave the sanctuary of the bedroom, she found John in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone as if nothing had happened. "Good morning," he said without looking up, his tone casual, almost cheerful. Rebecca hesitated in the doorway, her fingers gripping the edge of the frame. "Morning. You should eat something," he continued, gesturing toward the counter where he'd laid out toast and a bowl of fruit. "You didn't touch dinner last night." Her stomach churned. "I wasn't hungry." John finally looked up, his gaze sharp but unreadable. "You should take better care of yourself." The concern in his voice felt like a twisted mockery of their situation. Rebecca couldn't decide whether to scream at him or run as far away as possible. "I need to know," she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound steady. "What happened to Ethan?" John's expression didn't change. "Rebecca, I already told you. He's not a problem anymore." "That's not an answer," she shot back, her frustration bubbling over. You can't just say something like that and expect me to let it go." He set his coffee cup down with deliberate care, the faint clink of porcelain on marble making her flinch. "Do you trust me?" Her laugh was sharp, bitter. "Trust you? Are you serious?" "I need you to answer the question," he said calmly. Rebecca's pulse pounded in her ears. Did she trust him? Could she trust him, knowing what she knew, or didn't know? "No," she said finally, the word barely more than a whisper. John nodded, as if he had expected her answer. "Then I guess we have a bigger problem than I thought." By mid-morning, Rebecca's anxiety had reached a breaking point. She needed to get out of the house, away from John's unnerving calm, away from the oppressive weight of unspoken truths. She grabbed her keys and muttered something about running errands. John didn't stop her, didn't even look up from his phone as she walked out the door. The fresh air hit her like a jolt to the system, her lungs greedily filling with the crisp autumn breeze. She drove aimlessly for a while, the familiar streets of their suburban neighborhood blurring together as her thoughts spiraled. Finally, she parked in a quiet lot near the edge of town and reached for her phone. She hadn't planned on calling Ethan again, especially after their tense conversation the night before, but she needed to hear his voice, to know that he was okay. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Each unanswered ring sent her nerves into overdrive. "Come on, Ethan," she muttered, her thumb hovering over the end call button. Just as she was about to hang up, the line clicked. "Rebecca." Her heart leaped at the sound of his voice, but it was strained, cautious. "Ethan, thank God," she breathed. "I was so worried. Are you okay? Did John?" "I can't talk right now," he cut her off, his tone clipped. "This isn't a good time." "What do you mean?" "Ethan, I need to know what's going on. Did John do something to you?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Ethan spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Rebecca, listen to me. Whatever John said to you, whatever he's told you, be careful. He's not who you think he is." Her stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "I can't explain right now. Just stay away from him. And don't call me again." The line went dead. Rebecca stared at her phone, her hands trembling. Ethan's words swirled in her mind, each one heavier than the last. Be careful. Stay away from him. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of a precipice, and the ground beneath her was beginning to crumble. When she returned home, the house was eerily quiet. John's car was gone, but the lingering tension in the air told her that his absence wasn't a reprieve, it was a warning. She wandered through the house, her footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The silence pressed in on her, amplifying her thoughts until they felt deafening. Finally, she found herself back in the study, the room where everything had started to unravel. Her gaze fell on John's laptop, still sitting on the desk. Rebecca hesitated, her heart pounding as she reached for it. She knew she shouldn't, knew that whatever she found might only make things worse, but the need for answers outweighed her fear. The screen lit up, revealing a locked login screen. Her pulse quickened as she tried a few familiar passwords, birthdays, anniversaries, the name of their old dog. Nothing worked. Frustrated, she glanced around the desk, searching for anything that might give her a clue. Her eyes landed on a small notepad, the top sheet covered in John's meticulous handwriting. And there, scrawled in the corner of the page, was a string of numbers that looked suspiciously like a password. Rebecca typed it into the laptop, her breath catching as the screen unlocked. Her relief was short-lived. The first thing she saw was an open email, the subject line stark against a white background, subject neutralized. Awaiting further instructions. Her stomach twisted as she clicked on it, the message loading with agonizing slowness. The email was brief, almost clinical in its tone, but the implications were devastating. Rebecca's hands flew to her mouth as she read the final line, evidence destroyed. No loose ends. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, the sudden vibration making her jump. She pulled it out, her fingers trembling as she read the message on the screen. John, we need to talk. Rebecca's blood ran cold. Rebecca's hands trembled as she clutched the phone, her pulse roaring in her ears. We need to talk. The words were simple, but their weight bore down on her like a collapsing building. Her gaze flicked back to the laptop screen, the damning email glaring back at her, confirming her worst fears. She had to get out. Now. Snatching the laptop, she shoved it into a bag, her movements frantic. Her mind raced with thoughts of what John might do when he returned, how far he would go to protect whatever secrets he was keeping. For the first time, Rebecca wasn't just afraid for herself, she was terrified of the man she had once trusted with her life. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway froze her in place. Her heart leapt into her throat as she heard the engine cut off, followed by the unmistakable sound of John's footsteps on the front porch. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she backed away from the door, clutching the bag against her chest as if it could shield her from what was coming. The front door creaked open. Rebecca? John's voice called out, calm and measured. Are you home? She didn't answer. She couldn't. His footsteps moved through the house, methodical and deliberate, as if he knew she was there and was savoring the hunt. I know you're here, he said, his voice growing closer. We need to talk. No more games. Rebecca pressed herself against the far wall of the study, her gaze darting around the room for an escape route. The only exit was the door, and John was getting closer with every step. The door handle turned. In a surge of desperation, Rebecca flung open the window and climbed out, her knees scraping against the rough ledge as she dropped to the ground below. The bag hit the grass with a muffled thud, and she grabbed it, taking off toward the street as fast as her legs would carry her. Rebecca. John's voice rang out from the window, sharp and commanding. She didn't look back. Rebecca didn't stop running until she reached her car, parked several blocks away. Her chest heaved as she fumbled with the keys, finally managing to unlock the door and slide inside. Her hands shook so violently that it took her several tries to start the engine. As the car roared to life, she glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see John behind her. The street was empty, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching, waiting. She pulled onto the road, her mind a blur of panic and adrenaline. There was only one person she could think to turn to now. Ethan. When she arrived at Ethan's apartment, she pounded on the door with the desperation of a drowning person reaching for a lifeline. The door opened after a long moment, revealing Ethan's disheveled figure. His shirt was wrinkled, his face pale, and his eyes darted nervously as he pulled her inside. "Rebecca, what are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice low and tense. She dropped the bag on the floor, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "He knows, Ethan. He knows everything. And he's done something, I don't know what, but he's not the same. He's dangerous." Ethan's face hardened. "I told you to stay away from him. Why didn't you listen?" "I couldn't," she said, her voice breaking. "I found an email, Ethan. He said you've been neutralized." Ethan froze, his expression shifting from fear to something darker, something almost resigned. "Ethan?" Before he could respond, a loud knock sounded at the door, sending a jolt of terror through Rebecca's body. "Open up, Ethan," John's voice called out from the other side. "We need to have a little chat." Rebecca's blood turned to ice. Ethan grabbed her arm, his grip firm. "Go to the bedroom. Lock the door and don't come out until I say so." "Ethan, no. Go," he hissed, shoving her toward the hallway. Rebecca stumbled into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her and locking it. Her chest heaved as she pressed her ear to the door, straining to hear what was happening outside. The confrontation in the living room was muffled, but she could make out the low rumble of John's voice, punctuated by Ethan's sharper responses. "You should have stayed out of this," John said, his tone cold and controlled. "You think you can scare me?" Ethan shot back. "You're just a pathetic husband trying to control something that's already gone." There was a loud crash, followed by a scuffle that sent Rebecca's heart racing. "Don't you dare," Ethan's voice cut off abruptly, replaced by a sickening thud. Silence. Rebecca's knees buckled as she backed away from the door, her mind screaming at her to move, to run, to do something. The sound of footsteps approached the bedroom. "Rebecca," John called out, his voice calm and deliberate. "It's time to go home." She clutched the bag to her chest, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps as the door handle rattled. "Rebecca," John said again, his tone soft but insistent. "Open the door. Let's talk." Her fingers tightened around the strap of the bag. She didn't know where she found the courage, but she screamed, "Stay away from me." The rattling stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, John's voice came again, colder this time. "Suit yourself." The sound of his footsteps receded, followed by the front door slamming shut. Rebecca didn't leave the bedroom until the sun rose the next morning. When she finally emerged, the apartment was eerily quiet. Ethan was gone. The only sign of the confrontation was a shattered coffee table and a dark stain on the carpet. Rebecca dropped to her knees, her body racked with sobs. John's words from the night before echoed in her mind. Ethan won't be a problem anymore. Her tears dried as a new resolve took hold. John had underestimated her. He thought he could manipulate her, silence her, break her. But he was wrong. She would find out the truth. And she would make him pay. No matter what it took. What would you do if the person you trusted most became your greatest fear? Share your thoughts on Rebecca and John's chilling story below.